It's probably one of the worst years for the nation's finances in a long time. Fiscal year 2008 ended on September 30th this year, and the deficit was $455 billion, which is not historically large as a percentage of our economy, but is the largest number we've had during the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
There's been a variety of things that have contributed to that. It's been tax cuts that aren't offset. It's been more funding. It's been new entitlement programs over the last 10 years. And in particular, it's been the economic downturn of the last year or so.
Yeah.
The stimulus checks at the beginning of 2008, the TARP legislation at the end, and now we're talking about a huge, even larger investment next year in infrastructure and more stimulus payments.
So what does that mean? Who cares? So the deficit's at 455.
Well, Congress had to act again to raise the debt ceiling. It's kind of like the credit limit for the country.
So the deficit then is it's adding to the national debt.
That's right.
That's what we're getting at here.
Yeah. Which is now over $10 trillion.
So who cares?
Well, it makes the country much more vulnerable, particularly in times of economic downturn when we need an infusion of capital and spending. It makes it more difficult to do the things that we need to do to get our economy back on track. Not to mention the fact we're paying $200 to $300 billion every year just in interest. That's, for instance, larger than the Medicaid program. That's a great opportunity lost to spend that money on investments in our country that we're paying to our creditors, right, mostly overseas.
Right, okay, so we got $200, $300 billion that we could be spending on other stuff. But President-elect Barack Obama is talking about a $500 to $700 billion stimulus package next year, and they're throwing around this $1 trillion deficit figure.
Right.
So, is everyone just off their rocker here? What's going on?
No, I think given the economic conditions, there's good deficit spending and there's bad deficit spending. I think there's deficit spending that we can engage in over the next 12 months that will stimulate the economy, that will put money back into families' pockets, that'll help folks who need this money for their daily expenditures, and it'll also stimulate the economy by creating more jobs. Another problem that we're up against. It has to be crafted the right way. It has to be focused on things that give you a lot of return for your investment.
Right, bang for the buck is what they say.
Exactly right.
So and with the infrastructure spending, and presumably you get some added benefit outside of these next few years of stimulus.
Right. I think that it has to be something that we start down the path on now, but it needs to have a long-term focus. It needs to talk about what are we going to gain over the next 10 years, not over the next year.
Okay, so so one of the approaches to lessening the burden on government expenditures is that the Bush administration in particular has turned to contracting out federal work. So the idea here is that the federal government is presumably inefficient at doing laundry. But laundry companies can do it a lot cheaper, so they go out to laundry companies and say, hey, can you do laundry for this particular organization?
And the idea too is that you have other companies competing with to get the lowest possible bid, the best, as you were talking about, bang for your buck. And you're right, the increase in contracting has been huge. It's more than doubled in the last 8 years. We have insufficient oversight mechanisms in place to track the spending and to decide whether we are spending it wisely, and we're not competing nearly enough.
Well, okay, so what are we talking? How much are we contracting? What are we talking about? 10 billion, 100 billion?
FY 2008, the most recently completed fiscal year, was over $500 billion in federal contracting. It's $500 billion. It's about half of the discretionary budget. It's an enormous amount of money. And we've seen repeatedly problems in the contracting system, contracts that come in past their due dates, over budget, in products that are not worth the money that the U.S. government has paid for.
Yeah, is this is something to do with with the Iraq War? Blackwater comes up a lot.
Sure. Most people have heard about that. Yeah, that's part of it, but it goes far beyond Blackwater. It's not a problem with one or two isolated companies. There's a problem with the way that the federal contracting system is put together. For instance, Boeing had a contract to build a virtual border fence. This is a sophisticated technological system that will track people crossing into the United States on our southern border. Unfortunately, the system that was developed by Boeing was useless. The government returned it to them. So that's a $1.5 billion contract that we've spent the money on, but we have nothing in return for that.
Show for it.
Nothing at all.
Is it just the fact that there's no oversight? Is it that there's once you give the money to a contractor, it's kind of opaque. You don't know what they're doing with it. What would help us to kind of get these advantages, harness the advantage of competition bidding, lower the prices, having firms do it more efficiently?
Well, I think it's all the problems that you mentioned. It's all of them. We need more resources for oversight from contract officers. We need more attention paid by oversight committees, although that has gotten better this year. Webb and McCaskill, 2 senators, passed a wartime contracting commission that will oversee wartime contracting abuses. Senator Dorgan has done some great work with the Democratic Policy Committee in 2008, hearings to expose problems in Iraq contracting. But the infrastructure of the federal contracting process right now is very brittle. We talked about the doubling of federal contracting dollars, but we haven't seen a similar increase for resources and training for program officers who are supposed to be overseeing these contracts.
So what about 2009? What is the next Congress? What is President Obama? What are they going to do?
We've seen actually some good legislative things enacted in 2008 that were attached at the end of the year to the Defense Authorization Bill. So they only apply to defense contractors, but they'll help to bring some transparency and some openness to the contracting process at DoD. The most important of these is the Federal Misconduct Database, which will be a resource for program officers to look up companies who submit bids to see whether they're good corporate citizens, whether they follow U.S. laws, how do they treat their workers, those sorts of questions. That's a great first step, but much more needs to be done. President-elect Obama has said this is going to be a priority for his administration. He wants to look at the contracting process and reform it. I think that's a much-needed reform. I'm concerned, though, that it won't really rise to the level that will get the right kind of attention to really make the right changes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be useful to mention here that there was a bill that created an online database of federal spending and contracts and grants, and it was, the nickname for it was the Coburn-Obama bill, after Senator Obama and Tom Coburn from Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's got a name for transparency in spending. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing, how he spearheads, more efforts like that.
He definitely does have a track record for it, but given all the economic problems we talked about and the budget process problems, I'm not sure this is going to be priority number 1 or even in the top 10 when he comes in next year.
Yeah.
So that may distract from getting the right sorts of reforms in place.
So it's been quite a year.
We got a lot to do next year, so we need to rest up over the holidays and make sure that we hit the ground running in January.
Yeah.